So if we can attack each one or just a few of them, we can crush them in their ports before piecemeal, so we can use all of our strength
Mm.
against a fraction of theirs, which is a great tactic, obviously.
Mm.
And the Queen repeatedly said, no, that's going too far. Like, we haven't started an all-out war yet. We haven't attacked their mainland, and Elizabeth said, I don't want to be the one to kick this off like that. But eventually, she allowed herself to be convinced, basically. So there was this weird kind of episode where the Queen finally gave in and said to Drake, yes, you can go and attack the Spanish in their own ports. And so he set off. But then the Queen, quote unquote, changed her mind and sent another letter saying, come back, don't attack the Spanish. But Drake, I kind of think he purposely didn't get it, or he said, I've already sailed, or he refused to open the letter, or refused to let the messenger boat come up against the ship, or whatever, something like that. He just said, I was too late. I didn't get your letter till I'd already started the war, kind of
It's
thing.
kind of maddening indecision from her, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's like, is it that, or is it she's just doing this weird thing where she's covering herself, so that if anyone can say you are guilty for starting this war, she can go, no, look, I tried to stop it. I did stop the war. I didn't start the war, but it was just a misunderstanding. It's like weird, kind of. She does that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah, it's a bit of
Really
a
weird.
weird, shitty, pissy, weak policy, though, isn't it?
It is, but that's what it was, so kind of personal, Her foreign policy was just like that. She would like play on the fact, she'd go, oh, I'm just a woman, I don't know what I'm doing, women are changeable, I don't. She'd like say stuff like that as just a way of just delaying all the time. That was her most powerful kind of political tactic, was to change her mind, keep people off guard. She'd say something for years, and then when the thing was about to happen, she'd go, oh, no, I've changed my mind. No. And then it wouldn't happen. And then like the French ambassador had wasted like 6 years trying to get this one thing to happen. And then she'd like just kept hinting for all those years that this thing was going to happen. And then at the last minute she'd go, oh no. It was like a way to keep them busy and keep them off balance and stuff, and keep them doing stuff that she'd never had any intention of doing. And I think she was quite clever at that stuff. She was obviously genuinely fickle and changeable, but she also played it up massively just to get her way, basically. But anyway,
Yeah,
so
she was in a tough spot
she,
as well. Let's not forget. I mean, it was a difficult position she found herself in. If I could
yeah,
do another
because
very quick quote from the book "This Scepter Dial" by Christopher Lee, he writes, "Quote: Elizabeth was moody, and she was cautious to the point of indecisiveness, and she could not shed her three great burdens: the security of her nation, the constantly emptying treasury, and her succession. Moreover, she was not helped by the rivalry amongst her courtiers." End quote. So yeah, it's easy enough for me to sit here in my armchair, as it were, slagging off her foreign policy. But she was in a tough spot, and I mean, in the end, she was never murdered or usurped or anything. So she did well, I suppose.
yeah, it worked ultimately. It did whatever she was, all the stuff she was doing, all that crazy stuff. It did keep England out of war. When the rest of Europe, especially Northern Europe, was descending into chaos, the English streets were safe throughout her reign. So it worked. But yeah, so Drake set off on this raid to attack Cadiz,
Right? Yeah.
and yeah, so the letter that she sent was to say, actually, you can't attack them at port, you can't attack the mainland, you can try and stop their ships at sea, but you can't do that. But then he was like, too late. And they sailed so quickly that they caught the Spanish entirely by surprise. And he was just saying basically that speed was all important. He had to get ahead of the news. We can't attack Cadiz if they're ready for us, so we have to get in there quick. So he sailed as fast as possible, and when the fleet arrived off Cadiz, his own fleet was trailing in a big long line behind. Like a lot of his fleet was like hull down on the horizon behind him. They weren't all together,
All
and
strung
he
out.
arrived all strung out, and he arrived late in the day, and he didn't even wait to kind of scout out the port and the defences and stuff. He just sailed up in the evening, and his choices were kind of get his fleet together and attack in the morning, but then the Spanish would be ready for them then. And he called his senior men in from the other ships that were close by, and he said, "What we're going to do?" And most of his other captains said, "Well, we've got to wait for the rest of our men to come up, and then we'll wait for the first tide in the morning, and we'll go in and stuff." And Drake said, "No, I'm not doing that. We're just going to go back to your ships and follow me in, and we'll just blow the hell out of them." And some of his captains and his senior men that had sailed with him before were like, "Okay, cool." And then a few of them, like senior, like William Burrow was one of the captains. He's like a very experienced captain and a brilliant man himself, but not minded in the same way as Drake. He was, just a normal person, a normal captain who would not rush in headlong. He wanted to scout out the defences and come up with a plan of attack. And Drake was like, "No, we'll just go in now. Just like if we wait till morning, it won't work. So come in now." And then Winter was like, "So what's the plan? Like who does what bit?" And Drake was just like, "Just get in there and blow them up, sort of thing. Just that's it." And so he did that. So he wasn't flying when they came charging into the port at Cadiz. The English ships weren't flying any English flags or anything like that. They weren't flying any colours. And so the Spanish were like, "Well, no one would come charging in spread out like this with such confidence if they're an enemy. Like they didn't even the kind of shore batteries and the shore forts, the people manning them didn't think that they were attacking, because that's not how you attack. You don't just sail in."
It's like a preemptive strike.
Blase. Yeah, no one was expecting it. Again, he's done the same thing. He's done it in the West Indies, done it in the South Seas. He just doesn't give the enemy a chance to be expecting him. He's literally doing the unexpected and just taking full advantage of it. So he sails straight past the outer batteries, and they just stand there looking at him. And then apparently, an eyewitness said, quote, "The nonchalance that there was so great, and the confidence that no enemy would dare to enter the bay, as they were so little accustomed to see seagoing ships dare to do so, nor had it been heard in many centuries previous of any having such daring to break through the gates and entrances of their port." End quote. So he just sailed straight through, and there was some Spanish war galleys, road galleys that were supposed to be the protectors of the port, and they were just sitting there. I can imagine the Spanish it's the evening, right? The sun's going down. It's the evening. The Spanish probably leaning on the rails of their ships, like looking at this ship coming in, and a few more on the horizon coming in behind it, and they're like, "I wonder who those guys are," sort of thing. And then when Drake is like deep within the bay, he just starts firing on everyone. And then more English ships come in behind, and they start firing, and all hell breaks loose, and there's like a full battle. So there's like these Spanish galleys row out to try and fight them, but the English just start blasting them away, and then more English ships coming in, one after the other, attacking the shore batteries, trying to blow them up. And there's a giant Genoese ship, estimated at 1,000 tons, like way bigger than anything the English has got, with like 40 cannons, and that comes out trying to fight. It's laden with goods and stuff, and Drake wanted to capture it, but it wouldn't surrender, so they blew it up, and
it's a pretty mad action that he does, isn't it? I mean, I think because it was a success, it's gone down in history as a success. You don't think that at the moment when he went to do it, it's pretty crazy.
No, it's totally crazy, and a lot of his captains during the attack are like I say, like Burrow and another Captain Foxcroft, all these names of people going like, "What is happening?" Like they couldn't believe the attack that they were in themselves. And they were like, "Where is everyone? Where is Drake gone?" And like the sun went down, it's dark, and there's like this giant 1,000-ton galleon on fire over one side, and all this shore batteries firing, and Spanish soldiers assembling in the town, and just absolute chaos. And they're like putting the English ships are like pulling up and firing, and a lot of their men are jumping into boats, and they're rowing across to attack and like take these other ships. And a lot of these ships, so the Spanish ships that are at anchor in the port, in the bay, some of them are just come in from a long voyage, and other ones are getting fitted out for voyages, and other ones are, they might not have their masts on, or they're certainly not ready to put out to sea and stuff. So some of them aren't manned, Some of them are manned, some of them have cargo, some no cargo.
Aren't a lot of them getting ready to invade Britain? Doesn't this raid put back the Armada? What ends up being the Spanish Armada in 1588 would have been a year or two earlier. Is that not right? Have I got my years mixed up a bit?
This is definitely a part of it. Yeah, so they probably would have sailed this year. So this raid happens in April in 87.
Right.
And if Drake hadn't made this raid, then the Armada would have been probably about September 87
Right.
instead of 88. And so he does this huge, causes a massive amount of destruction, and they sail away, basically. There's conflicting reports of how much damage was done, but it was probably about 40 ships, something like that. Like some of them massive 1,000-ton giant galleons, and other ones a bit smaller. But yeah, something like 40 ships destroyed. I mean, it's a massive attack, a massive success. And then they sail away up along the coast, but they don't just sail off back home. They go and land on another promontory, Cape St. Vincent, around that sort of area, and they take a couple of forts on these peninsulas down in that part of Spain. And he lands loads of men, and they have like land battles where they charge these fortresses and take these fortresses and take them over, and then they're there for days and weeks on the coast, and then they use that as a base to go and attack loads of Spanish shipping up and down the coast. And this is where doing this action, they burn all of the fishing boats and every single like bit of wood they can find for miles and miles in every direction, and they take all of these other boats and destroy them and burn them. And this is where he does that thing where they burned loads of barrel staves for barrel making. So they burned enormous amounts of what were going to become barrels that would be used for storage of water and supplies for the Armada. And it's probably that, even more than destruction of 40 ships, that not only set the Armada back a year, but then when it did eventually set off, it still didn't have enough barrels, which may have been a reason for how many losses they took when they got blown off course and made their way home. So this was a massive blow to the Spanish. And it's another weird thing that happens again, where like by this point Drake has got this aura about him, and people still saying stuff like he's obviously done a deal with the devil, or he does witchcraft or sorcery or something, because he has this bizarre ability to capture ships and take actions like it's as if he knows what's going to happen before it happens. And this is what you said about the fact that he's like a master of intelligence. And he does it again at this point where he's on the Spanish coast. He's been there for weeks. He's running low on supplies and powder and shot and everything, so they probably should be heading home now. But then suddenly Drake takes his ship, and I think maybe one or two others, and like abandons the rest of his men and sails for the Azores. Sails out into the Atlantic for the Azores. And as he gets there, he meets I think it's the big Portuguese treasure ship coming in from the East Indies, laden with treasure and spices and stuff. And it sailed back from, across the Indian Ocean, up the Atlantic, and Drake he must have heard about it from someone.
Yeah, what a coincidence. What an incredible coincidence.
Yeah. So he's obviously heard about this happening and somehow timed it perfectly well to then meet them exactly when they're sailing past the Azores. And then he sails off, has a brief cannon battle with it, and takes it. And then takes all the another entire fortune back to England.
For the third time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was just an addendum, right? So not only is there's this quote of him singeing the King of Spain's beard, right?
Yeah.
By this raid on Cadiz, which apparently is him saying, I've hardly done any damage at all. All I've done is singe his beard. That's hardly anything. But then also by taking this giant ship, he's covered the costs of it as well and made a profit, which is just incredible. Absolutely incredible. So yeah, so he's delayed the Armada, but there's no stopping it at this point. So that's when it returns. It's assembled over the next year, and there's these great squadrons. There's a Portuguese squadron of Portuguese galleons, and there's the Spanish squadron, and all these great ships under various commands, are brought together and assembled into a great fleet and launched at England.
Right.
So the Armada is 1588, and this is probably Drake's last great act. It's weird because he's not. He's only one of the vice admirals in the English Navy. So the English do what they can to prepare, and they create as many galleons as possible and get as many men as possible. It's all kind of still a bit slapdash. It's not really a navy in the modern sense. Obviously, it's still this kind of somewhat private venture. There are the Queen does have some ships that are hers, but the majority of the ships are armed merchantmen, basically. And Drake is made one of the vice admirals, but he's just, because he's not even a gentleman, so he can't be made vice admiral.
Wasn't it Effingham that was the commander?
Howard is the Lord Admiral. And some of the other vice admirals are, can't remember, Winter and Hawkins and.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, you're right. It's Lord Howard of Effingham.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I think just in general, one of the main things that all the historians say is just that our crews were better. Just the individual sailors were just better than theirs, really. I got one quick little quote again from Charles Oman. It says, quote, "But unlike the Spaniards, the British, the English, they had excellent crews and were led by old captains who had learnt their trade in long years of exploring and buccaneering across the Atlantic. Men like Drake, Hawkins, Frobisher, and others whose names we have no time to mention." End quote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of it for sure. I mean, the question of what happened has been argued over and continues to be argued over.
Yeah,
And
whole
I've
book
read so many different
about
conflicting reports about some people, some historians say this is what happened because of this and this, but then other historians say complete opposite. That isn't true. That isn't what happened. But the English kind of thought that they had this new way of fighting, so they would have faster, more maneuverable ships with longer range brass cannons that they would use to not close with the Spanish galleons and blow them apart from a distance. But that didn't really work because the cannons, they weren't powerful enough to really damage the Spanish ships until they were really close anyway. But still, the Spanish tactics were to close, maybe fire a volley of their big guns, and then board, throw grappling hooks across and board with the soldiers on their ships. So the Spanish ships had crews, but they also had loads of soldiers, dedicated soldiers to fight at sea. And the English didn't have that. They just had the sailors who would then fight any boarding actions as well. So there are two different tactics. But the Spanish were absolutely fantastic sailors. And it's funny because Drake was just a bit part really in this grand clash, and he was just one of the vice admirals.
Didn't he slip off in the middle of the night to chase somebody down at some point in the middle of it?
He did. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Classic Drake. He was honoured with this position of vice admiral. He was later Lord Howard. Later reorganised the English fleet after a couple of the battles. Before the final battle, he divided his forces up into different squadrons, which is what he'd seen the Spanish doing. I thought it was a good idea, and kind of honoured Drake with one of the command of one of the squadrons. And he'd also on that night Lord Howard had given Drake's ship, the Revenge, the honour of being the lead ship for the English fleet during the night. So everyone had to follow Drake's ship. So Drake had every ship had a lantern right on the rear, so you could follow each other if necessary. So everyone was supposed to follow Drake's ship through the night, so that the fleet would be together at sunup, ready to fight or defend or whatever. But then in the night, Drake put out his lantern and disappeared.
Oh.
And then when it came to morning, he wasn't there, and the English had just scattered everywhere because they didn't have their light to follow. And he was like, he'd given him this massive responsibility, trusted him with this responsibility to, okay, can you don't act like a lunatic, act like an actual admiral or like a normal captain would, This is a big responsibility. If you mess this up, we'll be scattered, and if they attack us, it will be a disaster. And that's kind of what happened. There was an action in the morning, and I think Lord Howard's the flagship ended up really far forward all by itself, and then the Spanish swarm him, attack him, and he nearly gets captured, something like that.
Where had Drake gone to?
It comes back with Let me just double check. I think he comes back with a prize. He's disappeared to
Yeah,
go and
hadn't
take the
he
ship.
seen a ship that was like the treasury ship for the Armada? Because the Armada was supposed
Oh,
to be this an invasion force which would have needed everything, including its own sort of mini treasury or something. And he'd seen that and gone after that. I don't know why I think that. I'm not 100% sure about it, but
yeah. Well, he said, "Oh, I saw some sails off in the distance, and I thought they were trying to get around us." And then when I went to investigate them, when I went to see if if it was Spanish vessels trying to get in behind us and get the weather gauge, so I immediately went to cut them off. But it turned out it was just some. He said it was German merchant ship, something like that. But there's no record of any German merchant ships in any other account or anything like that. So he just made that excuse up. But yeah, it's just classic Drake. Like he can't be trusted with anything. He can't be trusted to follow orders or to stick to any kind of plan or anything like that. He just does what he wants.